Just as those of you come in, I see the attendees climbing up there. Just a reminder that this is a webinar format where we're going to have our directors give a brief presentation about their sites, and then we'll have plenty of time for question and answer. So if you have questions, you can type them in the Q&A box. You can also upvote any questions from fellow students that maybe you have the same question or you like that question, and we'll make sure we get to it. A recording of this is also going to be posted, live cast, and posted to YouTube. So we'll just give a few more minutes as people come in. This is our second presentation. We had one this afternoon for our domestic non-residential sites. At lunchtime, the recording of that is on YouTube now. And this is our second event. Going well so far, I hope. Tell your friends. Just 2 more minutes. Also, if you already have a question, if you weren't able to submit one, you can throw that in the Q&A now. Although I know there's probably questions that will come up as we start talking. Okay, so for the last people that came in, I'll just remind you once more that this is a webinar format. Attendees are muted, but you can ask questions in the Q&A box. And we will be hearing from our Project Center directors as we go through this presentation tonight with time for some questions. So before we get into that, I just want to show you who's here. And you should be able to see your directors now. So my name's Erin Bell. I'm the interim director of the Global Experience Office. We're the office that works with the Global Projects Program and all off-campus projects, as well as any other travel that happens off-campus, like athletics or club sports when that travel is ready to resume. So tonight we have our directors from 3 sites. We have Professors Lorraine Higgins and Steve McCauley of the Melbourne, Australia Project Center. We have Professor Lauren Matthews of the Hawaii Project Center, and Professors Mike Elms and Ingrid Shockey of the Wellington, New Zealand Project Center. So we're glad to have you. I've got just one more slide to show our participants, and then we're going to dive into the information from our directors. So just a reminder for our participants, as I mentioned, this is the second regional panel presentation. We've got a whole host of presentations and events going on over the next 2 weeks, including the regional panels, special topics and highlights about other global opportunities that you can experience at WPI, and then 2 return student sessions that I really encourage you to check out, where you can talk to students who have gone away before. The places to start are through these links below. Plus Global Fair 2020 is going to give you the whole schedule for the next 2 weeks. Plus off-campus IQP is your #1 place to be when it comes to how to apply and what to do next. And of course, eProjects is where you're going to browse all of the opportunities, read about the project centers, including details like housing, transportation, medical considerations for the site that you would be going to, and watch videos that our site directors have prepared. So tonight's really meant to be a complement to that. If there is information that's on eProjects, we're going to make sure that we direct you back there to look at it. And we want to hear from your directors about other information that might not be on those pages. So we're going to kick it off with Melbourne, Australia.
Hi, folks. Thank you for coming to learn about Melbourne Project Center and these other project centers in Oceania. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Melbourne Project Center to start out. Melbourne is one of the older project centers in the Global Projects Program. We've been running IQPs in Melbourne since I think 1996, so going on almost 25 years. During that time, we've worked with about 40 different sponsors in our sort of network of sponsors and run over 400 IQP projects in Melbourne. So we have a really strong group, a really strong network of sponsors whom we work with, and many of them we work with not every term, but year after year, so we can really build on the work that we've been doing with each of them, and many times build on the same themes so that we have some really important impacts, I think, in different areas in Melbourne. And we'll be telling you about some of those themes coming up in just a minute. First, a little bit more information I want to share with you. Melbourne, some of you might know, it's a really amazing, diverse international city with tons of kind of street art and a cafe culture. It's an incredibly livable and accessible city. It's actually been voted the most livable city in the world many times. So it's a really easy and accessible and safe city to be in. So that we really like. Transportation is easy around Melbourne. And many of our sponsors are located right in the central business district near where we stay. So it's easy to either walk or take a tram to most of our sponsors. Um, what else do I want to share? Um, just as you see there in the bottom left, the Melbourne Project Center runs projects in B and D terms, and sometimes in C term as well. For the coming academic year 21 to 22, we're offering projects in B and D terms. We do have in addition to ID 2050, which every IQP student takes the term before they go on the IQP, we also do a pre-PQP, which is even the term before ID 2050, which are just a few fun sort of cultural activities to introduce you to Melbourne and to your cohort. So we just wanted to let you know about that. And another little bit of information that we just wanted to make sure you know about. So we have a 2 or 3 day orientation for you when you arrive in Melbourne. It also, one thing you should be aware of, it takes about 2 days to get to Melbourne because of the date change. So from the time you leave the US to the time you arrive in Melbourne, it's actually 2 full days. So you want to be aware of that. And one thing particularly is that we're not able to have any students arrive after the official start date of the program, which we post on the eProjects website. They don't mirror exactly the term dates necessarily, so you want to check on those dates. And the reason we tell you about that is because some students who are involved with sports, particularly swimming and diving, I think, and baseball, and maybe other spring sports, sometimes have a conflict because if their national tournaments go over into D term, for example, it can cause a problem. So just to let you know in advance, please check those dates because unfortunately we can't make any exceptions to those start dates. So think about that as you're choosing which term you might want to come to Melbourne. So I'll turn it over to Lorraine, Professor Lorraine Higgins, who's going to tell you a little more about the projects that we do in Melbourne.
Lorraine, you're muted.
Sorry, guys. So there are 3 themes that our projects tend to fall into in Melbourne. We have many projects on education, and often STEM education or education about sustainability and the environment. We also have many projects on social and human services where we work with nonprofit groups, and they're working in disadvantaged communities to provide help with things like unemployment, education, to address issues like poverty and other social justice issues. And finally, some of our projects have to do with sustainability and the environment. So we'll just show you a few quick photos. These students are designing a STEM curriculum for a summer boot camp, and the curriculum was on space travel. So they designed some fun activities. That's an example of our educational project. We work with the museum a lot on educational exhibits and also trying to help the museum understand how to better serve the community and the types of folks who visit the museum. Oh, this group, I worked, I think, with the Melbourne Fire Brigade. We work often with emergency services in the community as well. And fire is a big issue in Australia, as you know. So we've done many fire-related studies and exhibits. And here's an example of one of our environmental projects. This is the Eco Center's project on microplastics pollution. And the students devised a method for measuring microplastic on the beaches. And if we look at the next slide, we can see the following year, our students developed a pump that could be used to collect microplastic samples at mid-water. And that pump is being used now by baykeepers around the world. And they really had to design a video to show how it works that wasn't dependent on language. They had to do it all visually. They had to find materials that could be accessible in just about any community, and different materials options that could be used. So anyway, our students have a lot of fun on these projects, and we're hoping that you will visit not just our page on the WPI site, but if you go on that page, you can click to visit our WordPress website, where we archive all of our projects. We have videos, we have fun things to do in Melbourne. So explore our WordPress website as well. Thanks. Hope to see you in Melbourne.
Thank you so much. And we'll move on to the Hawaii Project Center.
So hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Matthews. I'm actually a professor in the biology department. And in biology, my area of focus is in ecology. So that informs the kinds of projects that you can expect to see being offered at the Hawaii Project Center. And I'll talk a little bit more about the projects in just a minute. I direct and developing and directing the Hawaii Project Center. I also direct the Puerto Rico Project Center, so I may actually be speaking to some of you again tomorrow if you're going to that session as well. The most important thing I need to tell everyone about the Hawaii Project Center is that for all intents and purposes, you should consider that this is likely to be a very brand new project center for the year that you're applying for. We did actually function in C20. I took 4 teams to the Big Island of Hawaii, and they completed 4 great projects. But for future offerings, we are moving the project center to the island of Oahu, centered in the city of Honolulu. And the reason for that is just practical. The outlying islands of Hawaii are very sparsely populated, and for that reason, they don't have the kinds of infrastructure that we really depend on for students to be able to complete projects. In particular, transportation systems are just not good enough. So there's no ulterior motive or anything for moving to Honolulu. It's simply for practical reasons. It's much easier for students to get around. So you should consider that the year you're considering applying for will be brand new, and that has advantages and disadvantages. One of the big disadvantages is that there's lots of potential for unexpected things to happen. There's lots of unknowns, right? But also one of the advantages is that there's potential for unexpected things to happen, and there are all sorts of unknowns. So if you are someone who knows that you are a flexible person and you like to be kind of a pioneer, then that's the kind of student who might do well being in the first group to go to any project center. And you might definitely consider applying to the Hawaii Center. So just to talk a little bit about the projects, because it's a brand new center, I can't tell you about a history of organizations and sponsors that we've worked with in the past. That's all going to be in development over the next year or so. I can tell you that my interests in the context that I have so far tell me that our projects are likely to be environmental and sustainability related. I expect to see projects in invasive species management and general ecological management, which are significant topics on all of the islands of Hawaii. We're certainly looking at a high probability of projects related to climate change impacts, certainly particularly impactful in island environments. We'll be looking at projects for renewable energy waste management and recycling, which are critical issues on very small islands that have very limited land area. And I expect we'll probably be looking at projects in historical preservation. There's a long and important history on the islands of Hawaii and a lot of historical preservation sites that teams might work in. So that's basically all I wanted to tell you about the Project Center. Emphasize again, looking for students who are flexible, open-minded, and ready to kind of roll with the punches. We also do have a WordPress site, which is, so the link is right there. Please do feel free to explore that site and shoot me an email if you have any questions. And that's it.
Thank you so much. We'll move on to the Wellington, New Zealand Project Center.
Kia ora, everyone. That's a Maori greeting for hello. And I'm Mike Elms and the center director. And Ingrid Shockey is the co-director.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ingrid Shockey, and I'm an environmental sociologist working in IGSD with Mike Elms on this project site.
Hi. So I this center started in 2013. So in 2022, it will be the 10th year. So we'll have to have a big 10th anniversary party or something, which is kind of amazing given that it feels like we just started this center yesterday, but it's been going on 10 years here. So, you know, it's interesting how similar these three sites are, because like Hawaii, a lot of our projects have to do with conservation wildlife, where earthquakes are a major issue in New Zealand, climate change is a major issue, sea level rise, of course. But we also have something very unique, and you can see by the tattoo or the drawing, the carving there, Maori, who are partners with the sort of European ancestors of the settlers in New Zealand, so it's actually bicultural by treaty, and so there's a lot of really interesting aspects to that. Some of the projects we're going to have this year, not your year, but this year, have to do with co-governance and the challenges of co-governance, and how do you make it truly an inclusive process, and how do you deal with two very different worldviews, for example, around how to manage the natural environment. So it's a very interesting place. A lot of some of the sponsors that we've had over the years, we've had a lot of luck with the Department of Conservation, the Marine Mammals Division. We've done a lot of projects around dogs on beaches and hassling wildlife, and how do you control that, and what are the categories of dog owners, just as an example of some of the projects we've done with Department of Conservation. We've done a lot of projects with Te Papa. We work closely with the local regional government, the Greater Wellington Regional Council, as well as the Wellington City Council. We work with an organization called the Zealandia Wildlife Center that focuses on sort of bringing back native birds they basically took a couple thousand acres and fenced it in, and the fence goes down a couple feet to keep out predators, and got rid of all the predators. And so now it's a safe place for birds to reproduce, and the city has become awash in native birds, which is really an exciting thing. So we do studies on cats, and because cats kill birds, and so there's a whole lot of interest in wildlife and earthquakes and nature related phenomenon. What have I missed, Ingrid?
I think in general, it's a very fragile ecosystem. And so a lot of our projects have to do with that relationship between people and these extremely fragile ecosystems. But on the other hand, the city of Wellington is a vibrant, exciting place to live for 2 months. It's full of coffee shops and art and beautiful natural opportunities to go hiking just in the immediate environment. So you're in a very unique scenario of being both in an urban setting and surrounded by a lot of natural beauty.
I would call it the Melbourne of New Zealand. It's a little smaller than Melbourne, but it has the same feel of just this great place to live on the ocean. You see the picture here is actually, you can take a train 20 miles north of Wellington, get off and do a 7-kilometer hike along this ridge. That's an island out there, a really famous island, Kapiti Island, which is also actually a bird sanctuary. It's also a place that's very sacred to Maori. So, but in addition, I just wanted to say that there's this thing called the Treaty of Waitangi, which was a treaty, back in the mid 1800s between the British government and Maori. And that treaty is so central to understanding what goes on in New Zealand and is so important to understanding the challenges ahead. There were some, as happens with treaties, there were some misinterpretations or different interpretations of what was actually happening. And so there is a tribunal that actually, if people have claims, they will actually adjudicate the claims and make a decision about, what should happen with this claim. So it's a living document. It's interesting, a government, there's no constitution. In fact, it's still a parliamentary democracy, but the treaty is as close as we get to any kind of a constitution. And like Australia and Hawaii, obviously, it's a beautiful place. It's enormous, tremendous, amazing, astonishing, I think is the word we use, natural beauty. And so what a lot of students do on weekends is they'll go off hiking places. You could do the hike that's on this photograph if you wanted. It's difficult. There's no interstate system in New Zealand. So typically people fly places, but you can fly for a weekend. It's a relatively small country and you can visit some really amazing places. Those of you who can afford that. And those of you who can't, you can stay right in Wellington and have an amazing experience. You could take the train up and do this hike. There are hikes in and around Wellington. So it's really an exceptional place. It's summertime. In C term, and by the way, it is in C term, only C term, and I think there's lots of possibilities there. The projects we do are we have now a history of sponsors who are very loyal to us, and we end up with some pretty exciting projects. So, what am I missing, Ingrid? Anything else or?
I think that's it. I think we're going to open it for questions.
Yeah.
So we look forward to seeing you in C term next year.
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you all. Like Ingrid said, we're going to open it up for questions now. I did just want to remind the students on the call that you can check in with our office if you have any questions at all. So by emailing global@wpi.edu, giving us a ring, our extension is 5547. And those of you that are sophomores who are eligible to apply should have received a message from your application liaison, one of the staff who are available to answer more questions and even hop on a Zoom call if you have some specific questions that you want to go over. So if you didn't receive that email, just email us at Global and we'd be happy to put you in touch with somebody. But for now, I'll take this slide down and we will have some time to talk with the directors. Thank you. And Candace is going to give us those questions.
All right, so feel free to type in your questions to those who are on the call, but we did have some questions that were put in before the session started. So one of those is, how many total students are placed into these sites? And I can generally say that most of our project centers have 24 students and 2 advisors. So if you could all just confirm that that is the capacity at your respective project centers, please.
Yes.
Yes, in Melbourne, we take 24 students per term.
We have taken 25 and had one team of 5 in the past, and we might continue to do that.
In Hawaii, we're taking 16 students in C22.
Thank you, Lauren. And another question that came in was, since there are not as many project centers available this year, will there be more students allowed to go to IQP sites per term? And I think we, in this sense, that question has been answered with the capacity that will exist this year for those sites.
Candace, can I jump in on that one for one sec?
Sure.
The person who might have asked that may have asked before all of the active terms were available on e-projects. Everything is out there now for e-projects. So you should, if you go into the project opportunities, sort by IQP and off-campus IQP, you should be seeing 58 different site and term options available to you in 21-22.
I'm not seeing any other questions here. Don't be shy.
I'll throw one out. We had talked about this earlier today, and I'm interested to hear from the directors on this call. Steve mentioned some preparation from Melbourne. Is there any other preparation work for Wellington or Hawaii that would be done prior to the prep term? And we'll start with Wellington.
We have not done that. We do not do any prior prep work before the PQP. We do ask students, we do require students to take a class in Wellington, an introduction to Maori language and culture. Ingrid and I have talked about, we might add something, but we don't have anything, and we haven't had anything to date.
So for the Hawaii Project Center, there will not be a standalone prep course in advance of the prep course, right? So we go in C term to Hawaii. There is nothing in A term, but during the B term, prep, as part of your PQP, there's likely to be some Hawaiian language learning. Not much, because I've got to tell you, no one in this group ever gets fluent in Hawaiian, but it's good to start learning some very common words and learn how to pronounce especially proper names of things. And there may be some cultural component of the PQP, but there won't be a standalone in A term, no.
To just add to that, we ask our students at the end of the Maori course that they take to, in their final presentation, to actually introduce themselves in Maori. And that has been, I think, pretty neat. And I think the sponsors are amazed because that is a custom in New Zealand, especially at official meetings and government meetings and even in business meetings. So.
Steve, did you want to add anything else, or are you set?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we do a pre-PQP where we do a few sort of cultural orientation activities. Yeah, and we do a little bit other culture during the prep term in ID 2050 and the PQPs.
Okay, another question that came through: what are popular tourism attractions at each site? I want to start with Hawaii first.
You all may be familiar that Hawaii is a popular tourist destination. I'm really excited about project opportunities there, but it is certainly a lovely place to visit. So what you probably need to know about Hawaii is travel among the islands is not particularly easy. So if you're thinking about where to go and you really want to do a lot of local exploration, you might want to consider that at least in Hawaii, you got to get on an airplane if you want to travel to one of the other islands. So that's certainly possible. It's not that costly, but it is a bit of a barrier. The island of Oahu has a lot of attractions, great hiking, important historic sites. Pearl Harbor is right there. Lots of sites that are historically important related to Native Hawaiian culture. And of course, you may be aware there are beaches in Hawaii as well. Pretty good surfing, I understand. So there are great places to visit just on Oahu. I expect that probably a lot of students will actually get on a plane and fly to the Big Island, where it's just quite different. That's where there's active volcanoes. That's where you can go for a hike and build a snowman because there's actually snow there in the wintertime. And just lots of interesting things on that island. So no absence of things to do.
Thank you. And just quickly from New Zealand.
So a lot of the things that are fun to do in Hawaii and Australia, they seem to be shared between all of the sites. So of course, New Zealand, sandy beaches within 6 blocks of the housing. You can also go a little bit further and go surfing. If you just stayed in Wellington the whole entire time, you could rent bikes, you can do indoor rock climbing, you can stand up paddleboard, you can rent a sea kayak. If you decide to leave town, there's just endless possibilities for hiking and camping and just extraordinary landscapes.
And let me add, if there's any Lord of the Rings fans, there's huge, it's really the only tourist thing that I can think of in New Zealand, apart from the sights and the beauty of the place. But you can go to where they created Hobbiton, and you can actually go into a Hobbit house and have a beverage at the Prancing Pony. So that's a possibility as well. And of course, there's wonderful museums throughout the country, and most of them are really interesting. But yeah, very similar to Hawaii and Australia.
I'll just share a little bit about destinations that students like to explore in Australia. So many of them do fly to different locations around the country on weekends and free time. One major destination is the Great Barrier Reef, which is in a place called Cairns. That, as you probably have heard, is sort of under severe environmental threat. So that's a place that's interesting and important. Others go on a trip on the Great Ocean Road, which is sort of a day and a half trip along the road. Others take a weekend trip to Sydney, or a trip to Tasmania, which is off the coast of Australia, which is a really neat place. There's other local things right around Melbourne. There's beaches right nearby Melbourne. We do take a day trip on our orientation weekend out to Port Phillip Island, and take a trip out to the beaches there and see the penguins there and some other wildlife park. So there's plenty to do in Melbourne too. I rarely get outside of Melbourne when I'm here because I'm usually working in Melbourne. So I generally spend the weekends in Melbourne, and there's always tons to do. There's sort of seems like a festival every single weekend in Melbourne. So there's always plenty to do around.
Great, thanks. I'll go in reverse order. So Steve, I'm going to call on you again, but it'll go back to everybody. Is there anything particular on IQP applications that you like to see from potential students?
That's a good question. Let's see. We do like to see students who we know have been successful in their coursework, because that is an indication of kind of responsibility to the task and to teammates. So I think GPA is sort of considered to some extent, though that's by no means our main focus. We like to build strong, diverse cohorts and strong, diverse teams with folks from different majors and different backgrounds. We do look to make sure that students have been able to successfully pass most of their courses, at least through most of the terms. Though, sometimes students start off with a bad start and then are able to recover and do well academically. So we definitely do look at academics. And, we try to get a sense of participation in teamwork experiences, whether that's in coursework or in other projects or clubs or something that might give an indication that the students have had an inclination and experience of wanting to work together with others to solve problems.
Thank you. And New Zealand?
I can jump in and say, you know, we share a lot of the same interests as Steve just mentioned, but I think also because we work with diverse communities and particularly across Maori perspectives, we're looking for students who can be sensitive and good listeners in this environment where we're really aware that we're arriving with very little understanding of local traditions and perspectives, and it's important to get that baseline before we can start offering too many opinions.
I would add that we also look for some team experiences that you've had. You know, what are you like on a team? You know, what have been your successful team experiences? How did you contribute to that? Because it's a very intensive experience, intense and intensive, to be on one of the IQP teams for a full term, 24/7, basically. There's a lot to do, and so it's important to have a really good set of teammates and team skills. I forget now. I'm going to ask actually Aaron or someone. Do we still have an essay on why they want to go to a particular site, or we dropped that one, right? Is that right?
That's right. So this
Yeah,
year
okay.
the essays are focused on a challenging experience and teamwork
Right.
experience.
And teamwork, right? So I mean, I would also, if I would probably be interested to know why you want to go to a particular site, but we're not asking that anymore, so you don't have to do that.
And Lauren?
I think those were great answers, but I think that may have left the asker of the question with a slightly different idea about how we do things. So, excuse me, I think that the student's question was really trying to get at what we are looking for, like what should they be saying about themselves that might help them get admitted to a particular project center. And I think maybe Aaron can speak to that. We don't look at the applications and select our students anymore. Maybe Aaron wants to talk a little bit about the process by which the whole thing gets done. Basically, we look at applications in a general sense for not necessarily for our project centers, but for for the program. So we may be looking at particular things that we think are important on those applications, but that isn't necessarily an application for our own particular project center. I don't want to go too far down that road. I think maybe Aaron can speak to that. I'll just say, if you are deciding whether to self-select for the Hawaii Project Center, again, I won't necessarily be able to choose individual students. I definitely won't be able to choose individual students. But if you are looking to self-select who I think would thrive, it's going to be students who are interested in environmental related projects. I do think we're going to be heavily dominated by that. And again, students who are up for being really flexible and a lot of unknowns. Having said that, it's still one of the big advantages is we're still in the US. So there's only so weird it can get, right? It's still in a state of the United States. So that's all I'm going to say. I don't know if Aaron wants to comment on the application process.
I will jump in, and thanks for mentioning that, Lauren. So as Lauren mentioned, the application process is a two-step process. You're going to fill out your application form, which has 2 essays, a resume to upload. Will include your transcript in your final application, and that does get reviewed by a project center director of the program. So that may get reviewed by a project center director that directs the Panama Project Center, the Worcester Project Center. It's a general application, and it gets reviewed by one of the directors of the program. The second part of your application is your preference form, and that opens on Friday. That will be where you'll indicate out of those 58 site and term options available to you, you'll tell us which site and term options you are very interested in, or not interested. I do not want to go here. We won't place you in any place that you've said you're not interested, but we will consider you for your very interested in your interested sites. The reason we do that is we're asking for your flexibility up front amongst all of those centers to make sure that we can place as many people in sites that they're very interested in as possible. So when there's 24 spaces or sometimes 16 spaces at a center, we are not able to place every interested person in those sites. Actually, I can answer one of the questions that came up in the chat, which was how many people typically apply to the site. So amongst the sites that are on this call, we could have upwards of 200 to 300 people who have indicated that they're very interested in Australia, New Zealand, or Hawaii. Like I said, our goal is to use that flexibility that you give us up front to place as many people in their top sites as possible. There's a great video on this on our IQP application page, that plus off-campus IQP page. It's the final video of the series called How to Apply. And Deb walks through the preference process. There's some smiley faces to make it kind of fun, but she walks through how that process works and also what you should be considering when you give us your preferences. So if you rate only centers that have typically been rated highly, it could be more difficult for us to place you in one of those centers. If you consider all of your options and maybe some of those centers that are not on the highly rated list, that does make it possible for us to place more people in their top sites. But all of the factors that every director just mentioned are part of the consideration process. So showing your teamwork experience, taking care in writing your essays, taking care in tailoring your resume to this application process. So making sure that you're showing your work experience or teamwork experience. That's all part of it. And we opened the application early this year so that we could intentionally give you more time to work with places like the CDC, the Writing Center, to make sure that you're putting the best application forward that you can.
Thank you, Erin. I think we're going to ask another question that came through. How do you think the pandemic will affect the application process or IQP sites? And I think Erin was going to take that question as well.
I'll start with that, and I'll just say it briefly because we did address this at the town hall as well. But many of you probably know that right now, A and B term students are still working remotely. Unfortunately, the majority of our 2020 programs have been remote at this point, starting in D term through to the end of this year. Our project center directors have been amazing in this process. I mean, this is unprecedented in so many ways, and most of our students have been able to maintain contact with their project center sponsors, so people that are in country still. Directors have also thought about ways to stay connected to the country, even though you can't go there right now. So, you know, I really want to give the directors a lot of credit for doing the best they can in a situation that's really, you know, in many ways out of our control. So the answer for next year is that we are recruiting for E21 through E22. We're opening up E22 because we've found that some people are ready to plan all the way to next summer, not next summer, but the summer after. And our advice to students is to continue with your academic plan as you planned, and know that we will make sure you have an IQP whether or not travel is possible at that time. So if E21 was always in your plans as the term that you were going to do your project, our advice is to continue with that. At the moment, we can't say exactly what travel will look like. It's our hope and plan that it will continue as quickly as it can. But we're not going to do that until it's safe for our whole community. And quite frankly, that decision goes beyond just the Global Projects Program and the whole university, in consideration of, are we ready to put our students and our faculty, our faculty advisors, and even sometimes their families who are traveling with them at risk? So there's a lot of factors to consider, but please know we're doing that work in the background. Actually, every advisor or every director on this call is doing that work in the background already. And it's our hope as much as yours that the travel will resume as quickly as possible. I don't know if directors want to say anything about what's going on in your country specifically.
I would just add that I think for New Zealand, I think Australia too, outsiders are not allowed in. If you're a citizen, you can come back and you're quarantined for 2 weeks. But the reality is that Americans could not go to New Zealand right now. And so much of it also depends on what the country is willing to do.
That's right. That's the same situation in Australia. And so as our staff and administrators at WPI are helping us figure out what's the right protocol for when we can restart our international travel programs, we have to also think about what the countries are doing in terms of whether and when they're ready to start allowing Americans or others to start coming into those countries. So let's see. The numbers here in Australia are pretty good. There are not many cases, but they're being very careful about who they allow in at this point. So we'll be hoping that they open back up before too long.
Thanks, everyone. Now, I think we have time for one more question here. What are the biggest obstacles that students run into at your project site? If we want to start off, maybe Ingrid could start us off for New Zealand.
Well, I would say as a project advisor and director, the biggest obstacle from my perspective is the fact that there are so many wonderful things to do in addition to your project. And sometimes it's hard to sort of stay focused on the prize, which really is doing great work with your project partners and with your team. So I think that's a challenge. And, we as advisors are at least one of my roles as an advisor is to just try and help you find a balance between the amazing things that you can do on weekends, but also to stay focused on the project so that it really ends up well for you, for your sponsor. I mean, there's nothing more exciting and wonderful than a project that ends well, and you feel proud of it. The sponsor's happy, we're happy, the grades are good. I mean, everything about it, it's a win-win-win-win. So.
Great, thanks, Steve.
Yeah, same thing, same challenge in Melbourne with staying on task on projects. I'm usually generally really amazed with WPI students. They do a lot on the weekends and still really stay on task during the weekdays. The work schedule or lifestyle is usually kind of like a 9 to 5 experience during the weekdays and sometimes the evenings too, whether it's meetings with the advisors or teamwork or working on things. So it's sort of a pre-professional experience. And then students have more free time on the weekends, other than the sort of first weekend and last weekend when folks are really hustling to get things wrapped up. So students generally are able to balance that really well. Though it takes some organization and discipline, which WPI students are usually really good at. The other challenges I would say are cut across all IQP centers, I think, which is just that working in teams always has a lot of room for learning and working through complicated, sometimes challenging things. And we help you do that. That's what the advisors are there to do. So that's always something that we always have to work on. And also engaging in a professional way with our sponsors, because we have sponsors who expect a lot of our teams and work really well with our teams to generate really, really wonderful projects and with great outcomes. but there's all kinds of complications that come up with communication and working across cultures sometimes, and listening and figuring out what to put forward and what to hold back, and all kinds of challenges. And again, that's what the advisors are there to help with. So there are a lot of amazing learning opportunities. You know, sometimes they probably feel challenging, but that's what we're there to do. So yeah.
Last but not least, Lauren, I know you said that, you know, Oahu is going to be a new location, so maybe you don't know exactly what the challenges or obstacles may be. But
Yeah, I don't. But all my gut feeling is I don't anticipate any significant predictable obstacles in the near future. Again, there's always unpredictable things that can happen at just about any project center, you know, team problems, or occasionally interactions with sponsors become problematic, but that's the kind of thing that can happen anywhere, and it's part of the formative experience of doing these projects. So I don't really anticipate anything in particular to Hawaii. The only thing I can think is that it rains like for 10 minutes out of every hour. So you just got to get used to that. And the flip side is there's like 3 rainbows a day, which you can almost pretty much count on. So that's it.
great. And then I guess just in closing, one last question. If you all want to share, what is your favorite part of or thing to do at your project site? Lauren, will leave it.
Okay. I don't have a favorite thing yet. I haven't spent enough time on the island of Oahu. On the Big Island, so I'm not a good person to ask because I'm combining my research. So my favorite thing to do is collect shrimp, and I don't really expect anybody else is going to share that common interest with me. But it is in fact, it takes me to some really just magnificent, unusual places where there aren't a whole lot of other people. So, so I don't know. That's still a work in progress answering that question.
Thank you. Steve.
Personally, my favorite thing that I like to do in the project center in Melbourne is to take walks. I'm a big walker and I love cities. And Melbourne is such a great city to walk around in. I love street art and graffiti and architecture. And so I can just walk endlessly, just exploring the surroundings. And it's easy to walk around and safe too. So it's just a real pleasure to do that for me. I might say in terms of project work, one of my favorite things is that we've started to get more into creative storytelling strategies for how we share our project work. So we're seeing a lot of creativity and innovation sort of blossom in the kind of work that we do. So we're always pushing new frontiers in that sense. So that's something that I've been really enjoying with our project work, no matter what the topic of the projects are.
Great, thanks. Mike?
Yeah, I would say that the cafe restaurant scene in Wellington is spectacular, and there's so many ways to get great coffee, and there's so many interesting people. I would say the museum and the bicultural nature, when we're there in C term, typically Waitangi Day, which is to celebrate the day of the treaty, and there's all kinds of music and speakers. There are plays about the early settlements, relations with Maori, which is just amazing. Artistically, there's always an arts festival when we're there, typically in February and March, late January, February, March. So there's a lot going on. So there's a lot of just food, music, and then if you want to go to some of the most amazing hiking trails, you can hop on the ferry and go down to the South Island, or you can stay in Wellington, wherever, and have an amazing experience. So there's so many things that I love about it, and I'm trying to get used to not going there. I think we're all suffering a dry spell here, Ingrid and I. So,
Last but not least, Ingrid, yes, share, please.
I'll just second everything Mike just said and add the coffee again, just to emphasize the coffee culture of Wellington. And we've had so many students that really hadn't had much coffee before coming to Wellington, and then left just badly addicted to caffeine and these really incredible latte type coffee drinks that they call flat white. So that's just such a big highlight of the experience. But there are too many to mention, and I'm just grateful for the chance to go there when we can.
Well, thank you all so much. It's really nice to hear directly from you about your project centers, have a chance to answer some questions. And for students, you can go back to eProjects if you have specific logistical questions about the centers, and you can email us if you have anything else that comes up. So we really appreciate it. We can all go dream about our flat whites on the beach, and and we hope you have a great evening.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.